listening to the PR Wind Down Podcast, the show for public relations professionals who are ready to see real change in the PR industry. We are your hosts, April White and Laura Schooler. Let's get ready to wind down.
I have some news, which is that I surprised my dad in Iowa for his 80th birthday.
I saw the photo of you guys. I was like, oh my God. You guys, first of all, have the same hair color.
Okay, well, not exactly, but
I can see that you are his child.
yeah, the apple doesn't fall super far from the tree.
Right.
So my mom and I arranged it. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't tell my brothers. She didn't tell their friends. She didn't tell her hairdresser. Like, she was afraid everyone.
Not her hairdresser?
She was like afraid it would somehow get back because it's a small town. And that somebody would then end up like leaving a message or saying something or whatever.
Oh, can't wait till April comes.
So I Uber from the airport to this restaurant where we're meeting them. And she's made reservations for all of us unbeknownst to him. And I sit on the side of the booth so that you can't really like see me until you're about to sit down, right? And so he turns to sit down in the booth and it was like, what was his whole response to the surprise? Because he's so stoic. For him was like a big reaction, right? Because it was like all in the eyes. It was just here. It was like,
That's so funny. I accidentally surprised my dad just because this weekend too. And I'm like, hey, Dad. He's like, what are you doing here?
so cute. So cute.
Old Midwestern men don't have a huge range of emotion.
No. Yeah. Oh, it was so cute. It was so cute. So he was really happy. And then we got a Dairy Queen ice cream cake for his, cake, because that's the thing. It was super cute. But yeah. For future reference, if anybody gets those, you should really let them sit out for 20 to 30 minutes before you try to try them.
Like,
we should have gotten out a chainsaw.
You need a lightsaber.
It was, something. It was. We heated the knife and everything. It was like a whole situation.
There's nothing better than an ice cream cake, though. So
it was amazing. I'm not gonna lie.
Did it have chocolate crunchies in it between the vanilla and the chocolate?
Yeah, and then like the chocolate caramely things.
Oh, yummy! I want one now.
Okay, it's great. So I laughed because it's Dairy Queen ice cream cake, but it's Dairy Queen for a reason, right?
Oh, remember I told you about my pizza party that I had on my birthday? I got a Carvel ice cream cake like out of the freezer at the grocery store. So yeah, nothing's better.
It's amazing. It's the best. So that was my big news. So Laura, do you know that we have a very exciting guest with us today?
I realized that just today.
Yeah, very prestigious, very esteemed.
Well,
celebrity guest. Should I let her in?
Yes, you better.
Hey, Allison.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good to be with you guys.
It's so excited to have you on today.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, thanks for making the time. I feel like we have a celebrity in our midst today.
Hardly. Don't get that excited and temper expectations, but I'm very pleased to have a conversation with y'all.
So for those of you who may not know, Allison Carter is the executive editor at Ragan Communications and PR Daily. She cut her teeth during the early days of social media, helping small businesses create and execute content strategies across platforms. Then after a brief stint as an advertising copywriter with companies including Microsoft and Chase, she joined her hometown newspaper, the Indianapolis Star. So 7 years, she worked as a social media producer, a trending content writer, and then in her happiest roles as an editor to talented reporters and photographers, helping figure out what audiences really want to read and keeping the legacy paper's digital strategy sharp. So she played a really small role in the 2020 Pulitzer Prize winning story Mauled, which I'm sure was not so small, but that's how it's come to us modestly. And she joined Ragan in 2022. Currently works as the executive editor there, and she lives in Indianapolis still. So welcome. Do we miss anything? It's quite a resume.
I know, that's all of it. That's the form of my resume. That's all of it. So.
I love it. I love it. And are you originally from Indianapolis?
I'm originally from a suburb just to the northwest, Zionsville, for those who know it. And I've lived all over the metro area throughout my life. So
Very cool. I grew up in Iowa, which a lot of people think that all the I states are the same.
they're not. I actually almost took a job with the Des Moines Register. And when I went to visit them, I was shocked at how beautiful it was. I thought it was awesome.
I worked at the Des Moines Register.
No kidding.
My first job.
That's funny. It's such a small world.
Such a small world. And my parents lived in Indianapolis for a while before I was born.
Midwesterners.
April, it's not the I states that we think are all the same. It's the M states that we think are all the same.
Well, I don't understand. What?
Minnesota, Michigan, Missouri.
Okay.
Those are very different. Anyway, I feel your pain. And I think the Indianapolis Star is actually, it's a very reputable newspaper.
Yes, it's part of Gannett, which is the same chain as owns the Des Moines Register, and won a Pulitzer Prize in 2021, I believe, and also very well known for bringing down Larry Nassar, who was the Michigan State doctor who preyed on young women for decades. So not the best thing about the Wolverine State, but
Yeah, all of my relatives are from Michigan, and I went to Michigan.
There you go.
University of, not state.
Okay. So with that aside, so Allison, I know one of the things that we had chatted about being something of interest currently, but I'm sure there are other things, is how do you actually integrate AI tools and ChatGPT into your work responsibly without overdoing it or putting yourself at risk or fill in the blank, right? So I'm curious if you have initial thoughts on that, because I know it's a very pressing issue right now, and well, every industry, but PR included.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a huge issue. I've talked to quite a few folks in the PR space about how they're using it, and you can definitely find some through lines in terms of how to incorporate it responsibly. The first thing is you have to be honest, transparent about when it's being used. You never want to be hiding it, whether that's from your boss, certainly not from a client. You want to always be disclosing. I've even heard of some agencies, they used AI to crunch some of the data, and then they wrote all of the words around it, but they even put a disclosure like, hey, AI did the data on this, but the words were written by humans. And I think that's an awesome step toward that. The other big thing you want to make sure that you never do is you never take copy verbatim from ChatGPT and submit it to a client. There are all kinds of very thorny copyright issues that need to be resolved about who owns those words. And so we cannot responsibly sell them to a client or to an internal client, of course. And we need to just make sure that we are using it for research, for background, for getting ideas, but never in its final form.
Yep. I've mentioned this a little bit. I've done a little bit of that. And I have found that ChatGPT is often off the mark in writing and in research. There's something about ChatGPT also, and if you know, explain this to me. It says that like none of the information is newer than 2021.
Right. So my understanding is basically ChatGPT, it's called a large language learning model, right? It takes billions, trillions of words from throughout the internet and parses them down. And it's not intelligence. It's basically guessing what the next word that you want to read is, right? So it has only had new inputs put in through, I believe it's September of 2021. Now, there is a workaround. If you want it to be able to crawl the web in real time, that's when you can use Bing's ChatGPT integration, or you can use Google Bard. Those both are able to access the web in real time and integrate those tools together. But if you're using the OG ChatGPT, I would not recommend it for anything research-based unless it's about like the American Revolution or something that's very decided. What I might use it for is, here's some text, make an outline for me, or here's some text, give me 4 headlines. Try to contain it to things that don't require outside searching, and then use the Bing Chat GPT tool is my personal favorite. If you need to do that research, the other benefit to that is it gives you footnotes. So you can go and check for hallucinations, and you can evaluate the credibility of those sources, because as a human, that's still our oversight role.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
I love that Laura. Do you see that Laura's literally got a pin out and she's taking notes on this old school? She's like, I don't want to miss this. I gotta
watch. I'll show
be
you
right back. Sorry. Be right back from the podcast. I gotta take notes on.
I want a composition book with like a black and white cover. Do you guys even know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I got a stack of them back there with my legal pads, just like yours. So
right. Well, right. I have this, and then I have this, but I'm writing.
Oh, the steno pad. Yeah, that's super old school.
I just bought this like a month ago. So anyway,
Google's tool is called Bard. I have played with that one the least. The few times I did use it fairly soon after launch, I was not impressed. Like it would just be like, I can't answer that for you. And then I would go ask Bing the same thing and it'd be like, sure, let me do that for you. So I haven't messed with it because at the time that I did, I was experimenting. It didn't do what I needed it to. So I need to circle back and see if it's evolved.
Well, that's interesting because I have been using the one that is only updated till 2021. And in doing research, I'll ask like, who do you think would write this story or whatever? And then I go and look them up and I see where those reporters are now because most of them are not in the same place, not even 2 years later.
Try Bing. I've had better luck doing similar things and tests for Bing and been getting more updated information. Google Bard will not give you the information for privacy reasons. Like it won't give you someone's email, even if that's publicly crawlable on the web, which is annoying. So,
wow. Well, this was fantastic information.
Allison, I'm curious what other kinds of trends you're seeing that you're keeping an eye on. I'm also super curious if you want to get into it, where you see things going in terms of brands either proactively getting, and you already know I'm going to ask before you even said it, proactively getting involved in DEI initiatives or, sort of staying true to their current base, like the Budweiser issue, right? Things like that. Where do you see these things going in terms of how publicists need to be supporting, looking out for, protecting, anticipating, et cetera, for their clients?
And that is the number one trend. But before you ask the second part of the question, that's what I was going to talk about because that's what everyone wants to talk about right now.
Yeah.
It is the question right now is where a brand's going to stand on all DE&I issues, right? We saw Chick-fil-A get blowback simply because they hired a DE&I coordinator last year. They're not an organization I would expect to get super involved in LGBTQ issues, but just having a Black man, I believe, who was in charge of DE&I made them a target from their traditionally conservative base because about their stance on other things. So the biggest issue right now, the most pressing issue right now is the LGBTQ and really particularly the T question, right? We've seen Bud Light have issues with this. We've seen Target have issues with their tuck-friendly swimsuits. We've seen Kohl's have some issues around pride campaigns. Cracker Barrel, again, another group with a more traditionally conservative base had rainbow rocking chairs, and that caused blowback. I think what the right path for each company is depends on their audience and their base. For a company like Chick-fil-A, who has a more conservative base, they've got to walk one particular line. For a more outspoken company, like let's say Adidas or North Face, are often two of the big ones that come to mind. Many of the fashion brands aimed at young people, they're going to be more comfortable and less prone to blowback from having vocal stances on LGBTQ issues. It's everybody else in the middle, the many corporations who have broad customer bases, like a Target, where everyone shops at Target, right?
Of
Young
course,
and old. Yeah, that's where it gets tricky.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. I just think it's funny that a place like Chick-fil-A is conservative. I mean, who would even really have thought about that years ago? It's
that your chicken might have a political persuasion.
Right. Like I just because it's across the street from my building at work or whatever,
Yeah, where I get a little thrown is where I think there's some view that brands are meant to be leading social change. And I do understand the thoughts behind that, but at the same time, I don't quite understand when that came into existence. I've been finding it interesting seeing that there's now an expectation that somehow brands are responsible for changing the fabric of culture, which I personally don't agree with, but I do understand why people are saying that. I've been trying to trace the history of this. Like, when did this start?
2020. I mean, I think that's the simple tieback is to the protests surrounding the murder of George Floyd, right?
Yeah.
That was such an earth-shaking event for everyone. I was at the Indianapolis Star at the time, and I covered the protests and the riots and the tear gas in downtown Indianapolis, and changed something.
Yeah.
And every corporation said, we're going to put out a DE&I statement. We're going to hire more diverse people. We are going to make this a core principle. And now we're 3 years on, almost exactly 3 years, and we're starting to see that commitment fading with memory. I think with the LGBTQ issues, gay rights and gay marriage and gay pride have become very widely accepted, since gay marriage became legal nationwide.
Right.
It's that T part that has become very, very highly politicized, and the trans issue that suddenly is tripping up a lot of brands who have supported pride, like Target's supported pride for decades.
For a long
but
time.
Suddenly
They
this
have
is
a
a
long
flash.
history of that.
That for some reason was sort of the line where, formerly open-minded people were like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Well, I think that's been the result of a PR campaign too, right? There have been people who have wanted to make this an issue. I don't think that necessarily happened organically. Like there's concerted PR efforts from people who oppose these people to make this an issue, and it's taken over the culture. But as we look at generations, we have to understand the LGBTQ issues are very vital to young people, to Generation Z at very high rates. It's very important to them. More and more of them are identifying as part of that community. And so I think there's a very difficult balance. Is it the role of organizations to lead social change?
Right.
If so, what is that duty combined with the fiduciary duty to make money for shareholders?
Right. No, that's where I get tripped up. Exactly. Because it's like, okay, at the end of the day, you are also there to make hopefully good product or service for some segment of the population that needs it. And that is the number one goal, is to serve them, right? So on the one hand, if serving them also means, helping with their political issues, then it does make sense. But I think if you're mashing things together where it doesn't feel organic or like a natural extension of what the brand's history has already supported, represented, et cetera, I think that starts to feel inorganic, feels a little
right.
ham-fisted.
It's really just a matter of, again, knowing your audience, knowing your core, and looking to the future and saying, okay, who is my audience going to be? And I think that's a calculation a lot of these organizations are making, because again, when we look to the up and coming generation, we look to Gen Z, this is going to be something that they want. But in the meantime, while we have some aging populations who are on the other side, you're going to have conflict.
That's a great point. I feel like that's a mic drop moment for that.
Yeah, it's a tough one. So yeah,
for that issue.
I guess we won't stop it all to right now anyway, right?
I don't want to rush us out of this, but I also want to make sure we have time for one more topic, because I'm super excited to chat with Allison about where she sees things going in terms of the landscape of media. So where we've got some issues with trust in the media, we've got things like, these different Substacks popping up and people running to those and subscribing there. And then you've also got, some alternative news channels that half of or whatever percentage, let's say for all intents and purposes, half-ish are actually using as their primary source of mainstream news now. So where do you see the landscape going in terms of where publicists do they need to be versed in all these different media channels, or what are your thoughts on all of it?
Yes, they need to be versed in all of them. The outlook for traditional media is real bad. The outlook for what we called 10 years ago, new media, your Vices, your BuzzFeeds, your, all of those kind of second wave that we're going to revolutionize news and we're digital first and digital only, they're dying. Like some of them are dead. BuzzFeed's not dead, but BuzzFeed News is dead, which is a distinction I think was lost on a lot of people. Yes, you need to know influencers. Yes, you need to know who Mr. Beast is. You need to know, the biggest Twitch streamers. You need to have a LinkedIn thought leadership profile. If your metric for success is still, I want to be in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and on CNN, you are speaking to a really limited audience.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I mean, think of like, Insider or Business Insider, that didn't even exist, and Axios. And, now those are outlets that I didn't even know what they were. When I left, like, Big Business and PwC, like they were not targets. Like it was always the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times. So when I left there and I started to go into consulting at PR firms and for more startup or private companies, smaller private companies, and everybody was talking about Insider and Axios, I was like, what? So it was a big learning curve for me. And those are now mainstream with almost all of the clients I use, big, small, public, private, et cetera. So there'll probably be a lot more of that too. Interesting.
Yeah.
The demographic is splintering. There is no one's, and everyone doesn't sit down and watch the evening news like they used to, right? That used to be, your way to reach everyone. You don't do that anymore. People are segmenting into very different areas based on their age, race, gender, interests, political leanings, and people are just self-segmenting in a way that we haven't seen before, which offers some really cool targeting opportunities and some challenges.
Yeah, agreed.
I find myself listening to things that I don't necessarily agree with. And I feel like I'm a little more entertained by that than what I know, what I already know, what I know and I agree with.
I think it's wise because as publicists, we need to know if the audiences are the splintered. We need to know what people are consuming, what they're listening to, what their points of view are, because otherwise, if you're in a vacuum, living in your bubble doesn't make it so, right? It doesn't mean that then half of the population isn't consuming a completely different set of news and different facts and different narratives and different story angles, right? So if you don't know those, you're not in good position to protect your client. So with that, what I really want to make sure we do is get a chance for you to plug anything that you're working on or anything you want people to know about and where they can find you.
Yes, they can find our content at prdaily.com. That is obviously our website focused on PR content. For those who might work on the internal side of the house, check out Ragan.com. That's Ragan, not like the president, Ragan.com. Make sure that you check out our full slate of conferences coming up. The next big one that will be for PR professionals will be our Future Comms conference, which will be in Austin, Texas in early November.
Amazing. Well, thank you.
We so appreciate
Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Yep. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Well, that was an amazing interview. I'm so pleased that we had a chance to chat with her, and it's interesting to get her take on all of those things too. Are you ready to move on?
Yep.
Our next segment, our news story of the day, I know made you quite heated around the collar, as some may say. And it was essentially Paul Graham saying that remote work does work initially, which is why it fooled leaders who have since changed their minds. And he wrote this in Fortune.
Yes. So the whole debate about remote work, return to office, hybrid, etc. I mean, yes, that's the basis of my passion about this story, because he was talking about how founders have changed their minds about remote work and they're trying to get people back in the office. And he was talking about how many smart people were fooled into thinking that remote work or hybrid work, mostly work from home, was a great idea and this was the future and this is where we're going to go. And he said that he thinks that people got fooled because remote work works initially if the system that you're working with is already healthy. This guy's a VC, and there's other VCs that have started to question remote work. This guy, Keith Rabois, he's a VC, and he was saying younger workers learn by osmosis, which requires in-person interaction, and supervisors discover hidden talent by watching them, and that neither of them would invest in a startup that was only a remote work company.
Interesting.
Another guy from a startup said that they didn't think there'd be a loss of creativity, but he's saying that there has been a loss of creativity, and so this experiment is over. And so then they go on to say that the sort of rules and regulations, Amazon are staging a walkout over the return to office mandate. And it says that there's more energy, collaboration, and connections happening, in person. And that there will be remote first companies, but it works for some businesses and some types of jobs, but it won't be the default. So anyway, the thing that got my goat back was that nobody was really teaching me, mentoring me, motivating me, discovering my hidden talents 95% of the time. You go to the offices that people just were not helpful, not very nice, not very informative, not very instructive, definitely not saying, Laura, I'm going to help you go to the next level. Nobody was doing that for me ever, my whole career. I don't think. Maybe there was one or two people who were better at it than others, but most people are consumed with the work they have to do. They're consumed with their own, upward mobility. And so being in person for me didn't really get me anywhere. The only thing I will say is that for people who it's their very first job, who've never been in an office, that maybe there is something to that about getting up and getting motivated and getting dressed and presenting yourself and learning how to interact with adults when you're literally right out of college and you're like, maybe. But in terms of actually making me a better worker or more part of a team or whatever, never happened.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds horrible, but I think a lot of young people, because I thought so, you were going to go there and there's going to be people who like trained you and mentored you and were your supporters. And I had a few really great, nice bosses that I got along with that I still talk to, but they were very few and far between. Most people were what I said for me. So being forced to go back into an office every day in our industry would not benefit me in that way. I talked to my dad about this and he was like, oh, being in the office is, would be so great. And I don't understand how people aren't and blah, blah, blah. I go, Dad, the world was your oyster. And of course, that's where you made the connections and, went out to the bar or to the sports, game afterwards with the guys and hit on the girls. And it's like Mad Men, like my dad's like from the Mad Men era, right?
Yeah, sure.
That doesn't exist anymore. And it also doesn't work that way for most underrepresented groups, let's call them, are thrilled about remote work because they finally don't feel like they're left out, not understood, rejected, etc. But it's like you have more control over your actual yourself, what you do, how you do it. And going into the office would just, and we've talked about other things, put you in situations where like, come on, we're all going to drink. Well, I don't want to go drink after work.
Yeah. I feel like most companies need to have people in the office because they feel like they need to control them. And I think that's the old school culture of how companies have functioned. I think that will die out like a dinosaur, over time. But I think it's going to go kicking and screaming. I don't agree. I think that companies can be done remotely depending on what it is. If it's an engineering team and they need to be together in person, if it's a manufacturing, there are definitely places, I'm not going to say everything can be remote. Not everything can be remote. Like some companies
like
need to be done.
Like you have to be there
like,
to build the car.
You have to be at the bakery to make baked goods, right? Like, or you can make baked goods at your house and sell them at the coffee. Let's just say there are certain things that cannot be done at home.
Right. If you're a waiter at a restaurant, you have to be.
You have to go to the restaurant. Yeah. Like it's just not practical. Right. But to say it doesn't work and we've got fooled, unless your initial business model is reliant upon in-person collaboration that cannot be done with Slack, with email, with text, with Zoom, then that's BS. So
right. Knowledge workers, whatever they're calling us. Right.
If you set a precedent for your brand being comprised of people who are self-starters, who you can trust to get stuff done and, do it whenever they want to, then you attract more people like that. If you're attracting people to you that you can't trust, then you're doing something wrong and you're not trustworthy.
Right.
So there's something wrong in your culture if you need that.
Because you have teams that are not working together or are not responsible for their assignments that's not because they're not in person. That's because you haven't hired the right people or whoever is.
Or you're not inspiring them to perform.
Right.
It's like there's something else is wrong if you can't do it, or you're only motivating people through fear. And if that's the style of motivation, that can't be done very well virtually. So I think it's a red flag. I would say if your business model cannot make a solid argument for why you have to be in person and you don't think you can actually run a company with remote workers, then something in the culture is broken that needs to be fixed. Because the people that you're attracting as employees or the people you're keeping on as employees are not on brand for you, unless that's the culture you want, which is, tyranny and control. And if that's your culture, like you do that, you do you until you can't do it anymore because nobody wants to work for that kind of a company anymore.
Yeah.
And that's just going to go on as long as it goes on, but eventually it's going to die out. And the rest of us who are building something beautiful are going to replace it.
What do you think about workers who are like right out of college or, under 25 years old? Do you think that it benefits those people to be in person?
It depends on whether there's a good mentorship program set up virtually. We have a lot of young people that are not very experienced in PR yet. Mm-hmm. And because they have mentorship programs and they have people that they can lean on, and that they can talk to, I think they're still getting the benefit of being in person. I do think it depends a little bit on their personality type. I think it's a bit harder to be entrepreneurial as a young person, but some people are just born that way and they made lemonade stands when they were 5. And like, I mean, there are people that are naturally like that. So, but if the younger people are not self-starters, you might need to give them more clear goals, milestones, bonus structures, things like that to keep them on task and motivated.
The other thing I'm thinking is like team building and, collaboration. Like that never really happened anywhere I worked. Truly. Team building.
I mean, we sometimes had brainstorms. Like we'd have, let's everybody get
too.
But there's no reason you can't do it virtually. It's
probably better for people who would be shy in an actual room with other people. They might be less shy in the safety of their own home.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with all of this. And so maybe the thing with me is I feel like I got ripped off. Or there's swaths of people out there who had like this amazing in-person at company experience that I didn't have most of the time.
Not that I'm aware of. I will tell you, when I think back, the only job that would have been harder to do as well remotely was when I was the PR communications manager for eMusic. Right. Because a lot of what I was doing was getting to know other functions within the company, because I was in-house PR person in communications. So it was almost like the only way of information gathering. Yeah. And there wasn't a structure in place where I would have otherwise met with these department heads or department managers and sort of like gotten to understand what could be news even within the company.
Right. I could see some of that, but still, if there was this option for you of, doing video, you might not have needed it. You didn't have this option back then.
That's a good point. If we weren't all there in person, would we have then had forced meetings? Probably. Yeah. Would I have figured it out from that? Probably. Right. So
that's interesting though. I guess I worked for a United States senator in New Jersey. That probably would not have been possible to do virtually. There was like a few rooms in this office space, and it was I'd be running in and out of like the state director's office. I'd be yelling to this person and yelling to that person. And it was just like nonstop. Like, oh my God, the senator's on the phone. Oh, we got to go here. Oh, we got to do this. And it's like, run out, run it back. It was like a real customer service, basically sort of job. I mean, anything's possible, but it would have been a totally different experience. Now, obviously, everybody had to do it for a time during the depths of COVID.
Yeah, I think some of those jobs where you have to kind of, everything's super timely and you have to yell at each other and get.
Right. And the other thing I'll say is when I worked at PwC, there was people all over the world that I worked with all the time, in Texas and in China. Mm-hmm. We weren't all in person. We never were. And global companies have never all been in person. So that's a little bit, it's a straw man argument in that regard too. Global companies, people have not worked in person ever in many cases. And now they have more tools to even collaborate more. So people have been working, quote, remotely, but sitting in a desk in Midtown Manhattan or whatever for decades. It's not really 100% a new thing.
It's true.
So like you said, it's the higher ups who want to see, where are you at your desk, No,
and I think it's possible that if the culture they had pre-pandemic was, back to what we're saying, a little bit toxic. We've talked about this before, that people have a really difficult time after they've had negative motivation and that's been the primary source. It can be really difficult to switch over. And we've talked about a couple of examples of that, right? Where people were just not able to keep up because they weren't being yelled at.
Right. They're used to getting rapped on the nose.
So it is possible that in the case of these companies that are saying it's not working because their foundational culture is already toxic. So maybe they're right. Maybe it wouldn't work with a bunch of people that were previously motivated. I mean, it could be a disaster. So I'm not saying they're wrong, but I'm also saying
that's not a company you'd want to work at anyway.
It's not for me.
Right.
You ready to sign off, Laura?
Oh, am I?
Okay. Thank you for tuning in for the PR Wind Down podcast.
And thank you to Allison for joining us for a great interview.
Remember to submit your own agency stories and questions and share our show with your friends and colleagues. If you subscribe and leave us a rating, it'll help us reach new listeners like you. Can't wait to wind down with you again next time.
Next time. One day we'll say it simultaneously.
One day it'll work. I had the only other funny piece of it. Well, two other funny pieces. I don't know how funny they are, but one is that I ended up, hi, Twinkle. Hi, you want to come say hi? Okay. Have we ever had a Layla cameo on the podcast?
Oh my goodness.
Have you seen Layla before?
I don't think so.
This is Layla Rose. I also call her Twinkles and Monkey.
Look at her little puppy face.
Are you the cutest thing? Are you the cutest thing? Layla, this is my other big news. Layla got fleas. And then Mama got like 85 flea bites. And I look like a child that had chicken pox. Like,
oh my God. My cat used to have fleas when I was growing up, but they never like jumped to the humans. Wow.
Yeah.
It is summertime in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah. Flea and tick medicine. Don't risk it. They're very itchy. Not gonna lie, very itchy. Maybe that's it. Cause I think in my head, I'm sort of going against the tide on accident. I'm not doing it to be difficult. I just am not swimming in the same direction on accident or just cause I'm not or whatever, but my own drummer, whatever, my own stream. Okay. We lost the plot.